Joining me now to talk more about this, Kevin Frey, Washington correspondent for Spectrum News, New York One. Kevin, good morning. Wonderful to see you. Let's talk about these disaster politics, because the optics of this in a campaign season can be very significant. If you remember back to Chris Christie and Barack Obama in the wake of Superstorm Sandy, really got under the skin of Romney aides to see those pictures. Now Brian Kemp not appearing with the sitting vice president. What does that say to you about the state of things, and how do you think this ultimately cuts in the election?
Right. So, I mean, look, for Kamala Harris, this is both a difficulty and also an opportunity for her, because she can play this presidential role above politics and also be the consoler in chief, taking on one of these presidential responsibilities where you're actually outreaching to folks, making them feel better in their time of crisis. At the same time, it has given rise to a line of attack, even if it's not based in fact, for the Trump campaign. And Trump is able to appear with Brian Kemp, with other folks, to show that he is making inroads with parts of the party that, quite frankly, were quite critical of him just within the last few years. Yeah.
The central challenge here, too, I mean, as this response goes on, there potentially is some risk, I think, for Democrats in... There are a lot of questions about all of the people that are still missing in the mountains of North Carolina. How much of a challenge is that potentially for Harris, considering she is the sitting vice president?
Right. And I believe it is now the second deadliest hurricane incident since Hurricane Katrina. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And we all remember the devastating impact that had on George Bush's legacy in the immediate aftermath of that, in terms of people questioning his ability to lead through such a crisis. As we continue to see these communities that are cut off in North Carolina and other parts of the country, particularly in these key battleground states, let's not forget that, that could pose all sorts of difficulties for her as she tries to, outreach to these Sunbelt states.
And just the logistics of these communities, to have people voting in communities facing the kind of damage that we're seeing on the screen right now, that's going to be another piece of this as we kind of hurtle, frankly, towards election day.
Correct.
Kevin, I want to ask you about another story that it broke yesterday, which is Congressman Mike Lawler. You, of course, cover the New York delegation from here in Washington. He is in a swing district. There was this photograph that has surfaced. It was obtained by the New York Times of him using makeup to darken his face. He was on CNN last night, and he did apologize for it. He tried to explain himself. Let's watch what he said.
I can't change what happened 18 years ago. But I certainly, with wisdom and age, understand that is not something I would do today. And certainly understand why people would be upset or offended by it. And for that, I'm sorry. But, for me, there was no ill intent. There was no effort to malign or make fun of or disparage Black Americans. It was really an effort to pay homage to somebody who was a musical idol for me.
How is this story and his apology going to play in this race?
Right. I mean, the language that I found interesting was this idea of intent. Where is the line drawn between homage and offensive, given the history of blackface? This is a district that is incredibly critical for Democrats, though folks that I have spoken to in New York see this as probably the most difficult one for them to flip, or at least one of the most difficult ones for them to flip within the constellation of competitive seats across New York. You're seeing, obviously, Democrats are kind of getting their act together after 2022 when they lost all these seats across New York, that they're seemingly like, oh, we have all this Oppo research, maybe we should start dumping it in these last couple key weeks in the lead up to the election day. For Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who wants to become Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, all of these districts in his backyard are critical to his pathway to getting that. So whether or not how this plays, even if it's just on a razor-thin edge, could be critical in this district. And keep in mind, the guy that he's running against is a Black man.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about the dynamics of that race. Who is his opponent, and what's the makeup of the district in terms of people who may be, affected by this story?
Right. So his opponent is former Congressman Mondaire Jones, who was in Congress for one term. Ultimately, during the redistricting shuffle of a few years ago, ended up running in Manhattan in a different district in New York, and then decided to come back to the Hudson Valley to run in this district again after he lost his bid for the Manhattan seat. So Lawler has been basically painting him as kind of going wherever he wants to try to get the political edge, be that trying in Manhattan, trying that in the Hudson Valley. How can we trust him? Mondaire Jones is trying to basically paint Lawler as being a Trump sycophant, even if he is a moderate, that he would be willing to vote along with him. There are thousands of African-American voters in this district, so how this might play with them is going to be one of the big questions.
Yeah. So, Kevin, big picture, I mean, we hear Trump talk a lot about New York. He's campaigned in New York at certain points. Unclear how much that is connected to some of his court cases in New York. But when you are kind of looking at this campaign every day, are you seeing anything in these House races on the ground there that gives you a sense of how this race may play in swing states that we think are actually going to move for Trump?
So I want to emphasize that New York is not going to turn red in the presidential cycle.
Yeah.
Let's make that plain and clear. However, the word battleground has been tossed around involving New York, and as Democrats have argued to me, it is a battleground when it comes to the congressional districts. Mm-hmm. When Joe Biden was atop the tickets, Democrats behind the scenes would argue to me that he is not polling as well as they were in these congressional districts. Kamala Harris has ultimately somewhat flipped that dynamic, and they've seen, like we have seen across the country, kind of this galvanizing effect of people getting excited. The question is, will it be enough to tilt the edge? 2022, at the top of the ticket, Governor Kathy Hochul did not perform all that well against the Republican opponent within a single-digit margin. If Kamala Harris can push it back into double digits, perhaps there could be a down ballot effect.
That's really interesting. I was talking to one member of the New York delegation not long after the top of the ticket was switched, and they were saying that all of a sudden they were getting volunteer calls, people to go knock on doors. Yeah, really interesting. Kevin Frey, always great to have you. Thanks you very much. Come back soon.